and they did a good job. The players down there in what was the Barony?
Mark.
Yes,
the
Westermark players did a very good job of many things, maintaining a level of silliness at the same time as doing it in the Westermark players did a very good job of bringing forward aspects of medieval culture that were authentic in spirit, if not in necessarily full execution. And so there was that period where again where there was sort of a transition, right? How can we be silly and in such a way that people can't complain that we are not being a good attempt at medieval culture, right? How can we be silly? I might mention that silly involved a lot of lampooning of the aristocracy, being a good attempt at medieval culture, not inappropriate. So how can we be silly? I might mention that anyway. Silly involved a lot of lampooning.
Someone in the chat has reminded us that the thing on the staff was sometimes Pukey Monkey that you had to pray to if you threw up, but also there was the Kermit Frog that Amanda gave us. Does anyone else want to jump in? I'm especially curious about. Well, we'll talk with you. Go ahead. Anyone else have anything else they want to jump in?
I just want to mention the Order of the Pernicious Lily, which I don't think has been given for a long time. And the criteria for the Order of
stunning. It was just a stunning, remarkable thing. Everyone watching just stopped and watched and listened, and then he keeled over and died. It was just brilliant. It was just a stunning,
you wanted to jump
remarkable thing.
I was about to say it was part of a trilogy of awards, along with the Mucking Tall Mall and the Shattered Shield.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's only been given out about half a dozen times over the last decade or so.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I don't know that it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I am curious about, like, I remember, we used to start every Crown tournament with the weird melee. And I remember, like, they used to do things like there was a time where, like, Torgal had everyone throw the weapons into the middle of the field, and then he ran duct tape around it. And you had to run out there with your gauntlets and, like, wrestle other people to pull your stuff out. And it just feels like there's less of that preposterousness, which I'm not sure it's good or bad, but it feels like there was a lot more juvenile silliness. Of course, I was more juvenile then, so that could be just my experience. Ludwika?
I think part of that might have been because the Crown tournament list was not as big as it is now. I mean, you get 128 people out there, and there might not be a lot of time for frivolity. But certainly, I know what you mean, and I wonder about that. We used to also sing the Brave and Bonny Host during the processional, and that doesn't get done much anymore. And when it does, it seems like it's a dirge. And I am bound and determined to change that. But yeah, I think part of it is just the sheer volume of people involved that makes it more difficult.
The aspect of the Pernicious Lily, it outside of that award to try and encourage people, it was always admonishment to the fighters by the senior fighters to do good death scenes, right? I mean, and don't just walk off the field. You die first, then you get up, acknowledge your opponent and walk off the field. There was a lot more of an onus of you are here to also provide a bit of a show.
Yeah.
It's not just a sport. And I think, and then the Pernicious Lily, of course, highlighted that by giving recognitions to people that particularly did it good over time. So, and Blind Samurai tournaments. Do you remember those?
I do.
And the pandy bats.
The samurai ones were horribly unsafe, though.
Did we put pandy bat here, Ludwiga, or was that a kind of? I remember seeing pandy bat combat in the Kingdom of the West, but not. I don't recall, unless it was the time that the Westies came up here and made us run an event, and they said, "Do the pandy bat."
We did have 30 year.
Yeah, and Torval certainly ran. I remember
It was invented in the West, but it moved up here, Rowena, as an imported activity, if you will. Yeah. We were taking enough that we threw some of our own.
The beaver cleaver was never safe either.
No.
It's true. It's true.
The beaver board was very scary.
So before the quite some of that silliness, we always started every principality tournament in the early days with a grand melee. Well, and I think they did that in the West too, didn't they, Rowena? Started big tournaments with grand melees?
I don't remember.
Oh, okay.
I do.
But Barrick, I couldn't hear you.
Yes, just as a show of our Western roots, West Kingdom would always start with a grand melee, and we carried it on from there when we split off.
Yeah.
Again, I think that's probably easier when there's 30 people on the field than when there's 120. So it's hard to follow this.
Yes.
Time-wise, and I was, when you mentioned that, logistically is why. Once you get to a certain size, time becomes a premium. And, when your grand processional is 10 minutes of people getting organized and then marching in and kneeling to the thrones as they go by, you have time to sing a song and take a little more activity. But when it's 2 hours of people standing in line just so they can process through and then get onto things, you have to take a different approach. So
Absolutely.
So yes, and in terms of anachronism versus creative, in many ways we have so much more historical creativity now than we would have ever even dreamed of in the early days would come to pass. But everything just feels a little bit serious because of the time, I think. Not because people are against silliness, but just where do you fit it in? So you see silliness in pockets, right? In subcultures where they are a little less involved in trying to do everything all at once, but rather more focused in what is our activity. Well, let's say I'm part of the archery community just because I don't know anything about them really in terms of what they do on a day-to-day basis, but because I know they were a strong community locally, here again, you have a community that's maybe 30 people. They can do all sorts of silly things because they're not going off to attend all of these other more serious activities because that's not their thing, right? And that's not a condemnation. That's sort of a monkey pod thing where, what you do is sort of restricted to less than 100 people.
Can I throw a bit of a curveball at not just you, Wolfer, but everybody? I was talking to someone today actually about something that seems related to this, which is I feel like, I don't know if I can frame this in a way that is going to be at all productive, but I'm curious what your take on it. I feel like when I started in the 80s, there was much more of like an ideological historicalness. Like materially, we had stuff. We were still using carpet armor, but the king was the king, and we were sort of more able to sort of embody that sort of historical attitude of hierarchy and so on. And it feels like we're more now. I hear more people talking about their computers at events than I did when I was a kid, and I hear more people talking about we should elect a king than I used to. And I'm just curious if you guys have any thoughts on that, or if you just want to back quietly away and not touch that with a 10-foot pole.
No, I think that's an interesting observation. I mean, the first coronet I attended, I went on a Sunday, and it was Edward's first victory, and Zifron, and I didn't know who anybody was. But when I got there, it was early in the morning, and everybody came out and they were very friendly and greeted me, and even though I was sort of weird, kid coming in, they were good that way, but they all said the same thing. Shh, we got to be quiet. The prince isn't up yet. He's still abed. And so everybody was being hushed. And for an hour, the first hour, we were all being quiet and stuff until finally Edward Zafron steps out of the tent and somebody hands him a coffee, and then activities ensue. But nothing was happening either because the prince was not up yet, And so I think that illustrates your point to a degree.
Yeah.
Hard to imagine that happening now.
Yeah.
Maybe Interkingdom anthropology, but AS 15, AS 16 in the West Kingdom. There's a documentary that was filmed before West Kingdom and Qaid, and they would interview all the people of the West Kingdom, and just about everyone would saying computer programmer, computer programmer, computer programmer. So out of the West Kingdom, you had a lot of, well, people weren't talking about computers, they were talking about their computer background. So
Fair enough.
was there, and the difficult thing was at West Kingdom events, it was, we don't talk about our computer programming jobs, we talk about being in the SCA.
Yeah. Well, I remember a time when it was sort of very taboo to talk about non-period stuff, and it feels like we've slipped a little. So ideologically, we've become more modern. Yeah, Olivia.
Yeah, I tend to agree, and I do the same thing. And there's only so much control you have over what people are going to talk about in camp, and with my apprentices and stuff, I try to say, hey, let's, maybe put your goddamn phone away, and we're going to talk about cooking, or we're going to talk about something else, and we're not going to talk about modern politics, and we're not going to talk about whatever GIF you have new on your thing. So, and of course, I think it was Rafaela just said that a lot of us didn't have computers in the 80s, and even in the 90s, we didn't have smartphones, we didn't have 6 computers in our houses, and I'm kind of a troglodyte, and I have several computers of my own now. It was actually Ivan from Stromgard who built my first computer in 80 something, but that was of course a tank of a computer and not anything that I could have taken anywhere. So it's just, I think all we can do is just encourage people like we were encouraged. Let's talk about something else and not all that crap that we have to deal with. Of course, it was a lot easier when we didn't all have phones. I remember having conversations with people about how nice it was to get away from the phone and the ringing of the doorbell and all that kind of stuff. Now everybody and their brother has a phone.
Well, and we can talk about this more when we get to the virtual SCA. I think it's harder now that there's constantly interaction between that, right? Half of my SCA experience is online, so it's hard to divorce that from the other half. With everyone's permission, let's move on to the next topic. We're half an hour in, and we're only 20% into our discussion. We'll be here till 11, which would be great for me, but maybe not for everybody else. Let's move on to the next one. So this is actually a nice segue. Regardless of what's going on with sort of our understanding of fealty or talking about mundane topics or anything, we have gotten darn good at the material presentation of history. We're fabulous at making nice armor. Our costumes look phenomenal. The scrolls look fabulous. And I'm just curious about the ups and downs of that, because it does feel like when I was a kid, I mean, not to be too nostalgic, when I was a kid and did this, like a bed sheet and a pair of jeans and you're ready to go to an event with your pup tent. And now if you're not willing to lay out a couple of grand to buy a period tent and some nice historical underwear, you're sort of a second-class citizen. So there's great ups and downs to that. And I just want to hear you guys riffing on that. Take it away.
Well, I got to
go ahead.
Ludwika, I think you're taking lead on this.
Oh, am I? Okay.
Really?
I hope that that's not true. I don't want that to be true, that you laying out all that money just so that you cannot be harassed, and there's rules against that now. It is a two-edged sword, of course, because I mean, I look back at what perhaps I might have been recognized for in whatever year that was, and my skill level at the time, there is a difference between then and now, in that now there is much more information available to your average human being everywhere on the planet. When I first started looking at Scythian art and Central Nomad or Central Asian art, there was one book available, and it was the Rice book, Tamara Rice, The Scythians, which after years of study and being able to see other publications, that book has a lot of misinformation in it, but that's what I had, you know. So I think the thing that concerns people most about the being recognized for arts and sciences 20 to 40 years ago and being recognized for arts and sciences today, I think the thing people are most concerned about is that the bar is raised too high. And I can't say that they're completely wrong, in my opinion. Although, because the information availability is so much greater now, there is reason to ask more of artisans to do a better job, because the information is there. It's completely available to anyone who can walk down to the library and use a library computer. I do think there can be a certain amount of gatekeeping that happens in arts and sciences elevations, which is distressing. And I and other, people who actually give a shit about it try to do what we can to keep that from happening. But it's amazing. I mean, it's an ongoing learning curve. When I look at what I did, based on the research that I did 25 years ago or 30 years ago, it's a little embarrassing because a lot of my work was not really very good, and not really very period too. That's the other thing, is that because I didn't have access to the period representations, I didn't know, a lot of it was just, to put a not too fine a point on it, bullshit. I had to make a lot of stuff up. I guessed right in a lot of areas, but I also kind of fudged a bit. So I don't mind it when people fudge it a bit, like using a sewing machine to do a straight seam. There's nothing wrong with that. On God's green earth, there's nothing wrong with that at all, and there never has been. So anybody else want to chime in?
Yes. I think a lot of it too is, back in the day, we had to make our own stuff. You couldn't go and get, you could go get, if you wanted a helmet, you either had to figure out how to make it yourself, or get in line and wait 2 years and talk to her, be a good friend of one of the few armorers we had. Now you can get anything you want online within a week. You can have a complete outfit. I mean, and from clothing to armor to camping equipment to feast gear, everything. And even just in the last 2 years, what's changed so much is like, you want titanium chainmail? No problem. Well, back then you had you could get chainmail at all. I mean, I tried 3 or 4 different times. I started making it and gave up. Went and bought $200 worth of springs and started cutting them up and never finished. Nowadays you can I can get a set from India, in 5 days, and it's beautiful and it's cheap.
Yeah.
Which is a great my portion. No, the point I was going to make is that AS15. Okay, if anyone at an SCA camping event would notice, there would be a sea of blue tarp. Blue tarp was the most common thing we could afford, and boy, it was readily available. And Liesl and I put dags on our sunscreen of blue tarp, and people thought that was the coolest thing ever. And at the same time, because Liesl and I were driving around in a late model Toyota Celica, we had a folding table, and the only reason it folded was so it could fit in the back of the hatchback. And we would put out the table and the sawhorses, and people were like, oh my God, you've got a table in your camp with a sunshade with dags. That is the coolest thing ever. And again, this was AS15. Skip ahead to AS55 and you look at the camps and you see a sea of canvas, woodworking, and all this. But, and again, not to take away thunder from anyone else, it shows the evolution of SCA, of where we have, learned from, the old adage of standing upon the shoulders above giants, that we learned from our predecessors. We all got jobs, we all got nicer cars, and we even have trailers to be able to have nicer and nicer stuff. And it looks like someone else wants to jump right in.
Well,
go on.
I think one of the things we have to remember about those days also is that so many of us were students and not very prosperous. And as prosperity increased in like the early 80s, things changed. But the person who gave us this huge nudge, and I will always remember this story because my household was the autocrats, that's the event stewards of a crown tourney, and King Torgal put out a proclamation where he said, I don't want to see any more blue tarps around the Eric. It's got to be tents. It's got to be something that is not a blue tarp. So go with that, people. And Amanda Kendall called me up and she said, I can't do anything until I finish this tent. And she was sewing a tent in her living room. That kicked it off. That like basically we started to raise the standards and we all went around looking and going, wow, this looks really cool. Let's build on this. Mm-hmm. But so it's Torval's fault.
No, it's not a fault. He encouraged us. He motivated.
No, he did. He asked us to raise our level, and we raised our level. And then, it took another 15 years or so before the marketplace came to exist, where you could buy a tent. Edward and I have always camped in a like a standard camping tent, which we hide behind a kind of a cozy thing. But we've never owned a medieval tent. We've owned one that I made back in those days many years ago, but we've never had one from the marketplace. And
I want to raise two things.
Criticize us.
I want to raise two things here. The first one is this sort of speaks to something Barrick said. Ludviga, I think you're absolutely right that the access to online information has made a huge difference. But I also do think we need to recognize that the access of people like you who did all that early scout work and did the research was also really important. So I think that part of the reason we're so much better now is not only because we can get better books, but because we have better people doing that stuff. Someone in the chat has brought something up that I wanted to raise, though, and we are the worst possible panel to talk about this. Rowena, you mentioned that in the 80s there was a transition from a bunch of college kids to a bunch of professionals, and that made a big difference. And I'm just curious if anyone here has anything to say about it. It feels to me like the bar of entry is a little higher, and it feels to me like economic inclusiveness is sort of an issue. And I'm not sure if there's anything anyone has to say about that or whether it's even worth bringing up. But gone are the days when you can show up to an event with $20 and a case of beer and sort of bum a lift from somebody and go. And it feels like the bar of getting in is quite pricey.
Hang on, what kind of beer? And we actually try in our camp anyway. We actually try to encourage people that are new to just come and stay in somebody's tent for a few times.
Nice,
so that they can get the hang of it. So I think you're right.
There's a cultural thing there though too, because when you walk in and you see a bunch of fabulous stuff and you don't have any of that stuff at home, you've never seen this before, it looks like a heck of a lot, you will self-edit, right? It's, you'll go, this is, it'll take me a couple of years of preparation before I could come back and fit in with these people.
Yeah.
I'll go do something else, whereas if you look at a Shakespearean festival, you're going there not expecting to be a participant. You're going there to be entertained by the people on stage. And that's, at one point in time, that's the great advantage and difference that we had with Ren fairs and Shakespearean festivals and such. And we talked about it. The people that are here are not here to entertain you. Our operating premise is that you're here to join in and participate with the folks that are here. So, and I think that's a harder thing to overcome once we got past. It was easy to feel in those first few years, feel okay because nobody had anything, you know? So, you know, and I will also say that $20 when you were a youth is a little more like $100 now. But
yeah, for sure. Yeah. Sorry, Barrick.
Can you go to a 12 night these days without spending $500 minimum to get started? I mean, everybody has a hotel room, expensive hotel rooms. When I first joined, it's one of the best things I did when I went to a 12th night is, you know, we always got billeted out. And that's how I developed my best friends. You know, that's how I got to know all the different people from Southern Oregon and that, because when I went there, I stayed at their place. And when they came up north, they came and stayed at my place. And that's how I got to know them. And nowadays that's unheard of, you know.
It's a little hard, actually, you know, when you've got 2,000 people rolling in for an event that's going to last, and you have to camp too. I don't know about when you first got in Stroke, but it took me a while to sort of think back about this. But my first few years, they were day events. And we'd rumble on up to Seattle, and we'd jump out of the car and dump our stuff on the ground. You know, there was no such thing as day shades and stuff. And we do the thing, and then we would do exactly what you said. We'd say, who's doing afters? Where's the party? And where's the person I'm staying with? You know, and what's their address? How do I get there? But there was a separation between the event and afters. But now there is no separation, right?
Sorry, Barrick wanted to jump in here. Barrick?
I was about to say, once upon a time, and again, and the 12th night is an excellent example of once upon a time, we did not have 12th nights at hotels. 12th nights would be either at some either a Grange Hall or whatever.
A church.
But people, and usually, and if there was a feast, it would be at some place like a school or wherever on the other side of town. But the key thing was, where's my crash space? The autocrats would organize, there's crash space, who am I staying with? And we'd all go over the group. It wasn't until Rorick and Ontadina who had the very first 12th night where we actually stayed in a hotel. And people were just so like, oh my God, we're staying in a hotel. This feels just like a con.
Didn't you make 12th night con badges for that? Wasn't that you?
Yeah, but we're not going to talk about that.
Okay.
That's different. Yeah. And the money went to the sponsor group, so that's different. Anyway,
okay.
But the idea is that even at that time, even the West Keenan, which was still significantly bigger than us, never thought the idea of like, oh my God, having a hotel. But once we started in a hotel, yes, you're right. The price went up. But the idea is, but the overall thing is that we're sponsoring new people coming in. But before, when we were still the starving students, it was all crash space. The sponsoring branch was like, well, where can we find some place that's cheap? And someone says, hey, I've got an inn at this high school. We can have our feast there, but we still all go back and have, like you said, the after party, and then crash space at the end.
Ludviga.
I've even tried a few times to get get crash space going again. But it seems like now people would rather stay in a hotel. I don't know. They just don't want to burden someone or burden people or whatever. Plus the other problem that we've had over the years is that we've lost those fantastic venues that we used to be able to have a 12th night in. Those venues are gone. The one that's here in Three Mountains, what was that? It was a Masonic Lodge downtown.
Yeah. That was good.
Beautiful building. And it got sold, and all of the big rooms got made into littler rooms, and it's just no longer available. Even for local events, we just don't have as many venues as we would, affordable venues that there were in the old days. Well,
in fact, I was going to mention the fact that something else that's happened mundanely is a lot of those spaces that we would use when we were smaller have now they look at their space and say we can monetize this, right? There's a demand for space and we can make a penny off of it. And so, you know, and we don't look like a club anymore, right? Back then you looked like maybe a college club. And so you said, could we get use of this wall in the college? And they say, yeah, you're one of our college clubs, right? Yeah, of course we are, you know, and you know, and that doesn't work as easily, you know, and we're running out. I mean, quite frankly, it's getting harder to get parks, not just buildings, you know.
Scale has played a part in that as well. Like one thing that's been kind of fun is for a long time, that Camp McLean site was impractical because of size, but our Crown events have gotten just smaller enough that we can kind of cram ourselves in there. And that's the kind of thing that's actually one. I mean, obviously it's not a great thing that our event sizes have gone down, but it's one small silver lining, I guess.
And that's a good comparison of how, and hopefully it's going to be talked about later on with some other speaker, is how much have we grown? As an example, Bell Fountain Park down in the Principality of the Summits could host Eagles and even a Crown event. Now it's barely big enough to handle a Principality event. We've grown over the last 40, 50 years.
Well, I think that might be a nice segue to our next topic, actually. Inclusion is a really interesting thing that is very topical now. There's a lot of talk about it. I'm interested in how, as we've grown, we've diversified. So, Alfred, you were talking about how it used to be day events where you'd show up and do the thing and leave. And the thing used to be fighting, right? It used to be that an event was totally centered around fighting. That was sort of the central core of everything. And now, as we sort of embraced a whole bunch of other communities, that's been great. It's fabulous to see the rapier people and the equestrians and all those other people develop these thriving communities. But it has, of course, fragmented the attention of the event, which is really interesting to me. Along with this is a whole issue of cultural diversity of every sort, both of personas and of the people who are participating. So, Rowena, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on those topics.
Well, one of the things I was reflecting on when I was getting my thoughts together about this speech was how in the late 70s and early 80s, the SCA was very Western European. When you came into the SCA, one of the things you chose was, am I going to be English 14th century or Italian 14th century, or maybe I'll be adventurous and be Spanish. And when those of us who began to branch out into those associate cultures that fed Western Europe, there was pushback from people saying, no, that's not that. We're Western European before 1650. Where do you come in? This one of the things that I responded with that, because I started out with an Italian persona when I first began in the SCA, but I discovered that in Ontario, you do not wear a dress that drags on the ground. And I shifted to, and I was also, other things pushed me to becoming a Middle Eastern persona. And I had forgotten until I listened to Duchess Lau's sister's interview that I did get some pushback. I got people asking me, how does this fit? What does this do with us? And one of the adjustments that I made is in my University of Ithaca class that I taught on Survey of the Middle Ages, which is, let me tell you, a really hard class to teach. And I spent much longer on the Silk Road, the Spice Trail, and those invasions of the Middle East that the West calls the Crusades, in order to close the loop on all those influences that were happening. And now that we have much more access to various pieces of art that we could never see because they used to be only in museums and now they're online, we see far more people from cultures all over the East or South, all coming into Europe, being members of the European community. And a lot of Europeans also being people who were living in various parts of the East. So that agglomeration, I've never seen because I really enjoyed seeing this. I mean, Ludwika has a Scythian persona and has been studying Scythians, and the Scythians are not Europeans.
I do remember, well, it used to be Kapora, wasn't it? Like I remember being told in my newcomers classes, like, oh, it's Western Europe and it's 650 to 1650. And sort of people.
And even 1650 was questionable. According to Kapora, and trust me, I know, the SCA is dedicated to pre-17th century culture. But there was a lot of people, even especially out of the West, who felt that the cutoff of 1600 wasn't right. It needed to be 1650. And there was a lot of conflict over 50 years. And that was still Western European. And there were times where someone would say, oh, I want a non-European persona. And there were groups that just would just lose it. It's like, oh my God, that's a Mongol. Well, the Mongols crossed the damn Danube, for God's sakes. And we're going like, my persona would have seen one of them. We don't know what to make of them, but we would have seen one. But the idea of like how and this, hopefully someone's going to be talking about this, of how for the part of inclusion of how the SCA grew from being a pre-17th century culture. And people even argue by saying, okay, late period cutoff, 1600. Where's that early cutoff? 1,000 years, 1,500. I mean, there's a lot of people who already feel like if you're already pushing 1,600, it's almost like seeing someone in a Star Trek uniform walking around in modern era. It's just like, it's jarring, but we know it's within our persona. But as soon as we started going early Scythian, late Germano-Roman, and then we started getting more of the Asian and even New World personas, you know, it's like surely European courts would have known about them, and even kingdoms, and even at the board of the corporate level was thinking about, is this something a Western European would have known about? Yes, so we need to include them.
We had another inclusion struggle that was going on in those early years as well, and that was women as fighters, because the allowing women to get into armor and actually participate in the fighting was, as Barrett's reaction shows, was one of those one of those things where people were unsure. How is this going to work? Can we make the right kind of armor? You know, those kinds of questions that we now go, well, wait a minute, that's no big deal.
Yeah, it was.
And there was a discussion that was on the Facebook group. I think the Kingdom Facebook group a couple of days ago about celebrating 55 years of women in the SCA accomplishing things, and the fighter question came up. Trudy Lacklandia was knighted in 1977, so it was only 11 years after the society started, and she must have been in armor well before that in order to be a knight in 1977. So, you know, it goes back pretty far, but it was not common, and it took a while to get women into the fighting ranks who wanted to.
Oh yeah, and in 1980, Sir Mathan of Elfhaven was a princess in her own right.
Yes.
So yes, but even then, there were branches who bridled at the fact, like, why do girls want to fight? And that was, trying to explain to them by saying, why not?
Well, even to the point where some of the established fighters were still refusing to face women on the field, right?
Exactly. I will not strike a woman. No, you're striking an opponent. But that's a different topic.
Yeah.
Well, I think we should encourage people not to hit women fighters. It's like if you wanted to stand there and let them hit you, you do that.
Yeah. But keep in mind what I said is they wouldn't face them on the field. Right?
Oh, that's not okay. That's totally out. That's totally off.
So yeah, I just talking a lot about the cultures. I think just in terms of the type of people that the mundane cultures that we have, inclusivity and diversity often isn't about your historical persona being accepted and included and all, but rather, the sense that we're awful monoculture in the modern world. And I mentioned this talking to you all folks before we got together here a week or so ago, but my memories, which, you know, are weak, but is that I was astounded at how inclusive I felt my early events were, right? And everybody that showed up, because you showed up, you were one of us. And it didn't matter, you know. Doesn't mean that over time people didn't go, wow, that, you know, I'm going to leave when he comes, but you know, that's neither here nor there. That's not, I think, the part of the topic. But we weren't very diverse. We were all college students, pretty much middle class white, because that's who could afford to go to college. You know, of course, here we were all West Coasters. And I guess the inclusivity was more along the lines of you were here, you're included. So, and I don't know how that translates to today. Where do we take that? You know, so.
I think that's partly about economies of scale again. I was just thinking as you were saying that, I remember when I started in the early 80s, like people were just so zealous to share the SCA. Like if you walked within a block of an SCA event, somebody would run up and hug you and say, have you opened your heart to the Middle Ages? Like handing out pamphlets, right? And now I feel like much more there's sort of a nerdcore, like you're not a real person. There's more gatekeeping of sort of defense of I'm a real SCA person because I've been here longer. And I think that's just economies of scale. I think when you're small and new, you want more members than when you're old and, you know, more solidified, it's less so.
I'm not exactly sure where this fits in, but another popular thing when we were young, like, or when I was young and the SCA was young, SCA people that once they found the environment, they seemed to really get a thrill out of what they called freaking the mundanes.
Oh, yes.
Which is it, when I put those things together, right? You know, yeah, those do they fit? You know, you want to go freak the people out that don't know about you, but you also want them to come and be part of you. And you know. Anyway, not sure, but anyway.
Well, I do find it funny that we're it's a bunch of middle-aged white people talking about diversity and inclusion. I'm sure that's awesome. I am curious. This sort of speaks back to something that I forget who said this at the very opening. Somebody was talking about how we're so much better at recognizing our artisans and how the diversity of awards is great because it sort of recognizes a bunch of the hard work that's happened. And I agree. I think again, like the various champions and the inclusion of people who aren't just basically fighting, I think that's great. I'm wondering about award culture. I do feel like there is a little bit of a sort of a bean counting award culture in the SCA in some fields. Anyone have any thoughts on that? No? Maybe I'm just
well, yes, but
a volunteer organization needs to have a recognition system. That's kind of a basic structure of a volunteer organization. Volunteers don't just do things for glory or having people point at them when they walk by. Mm-hmm. You need to be thanked, and you need to achieve things and be recognized for them, and that's what the words are.
And branches need a way of identifying those individuals who are contributing. This is why at the Barony level and higher, we need some way of saying these people are doing well, and people would like to get that acknowledgement. Yes, you can have the Baron and Baroness, Prince and Princess, or even King and Queen acknowledged, but the idea of being given some sort of a Benny by saying, and here's a token to show our appreciation of what you've done. Now, yes, over a 50-year history, you can argue that has the breadth of awards grown. Yes, over 50 years, each branch does. Every new barony has to have their award for service, their award for fighting, their award for arts and sciences, or even at a principality or kingdom level. There's always that perception of, okay, we have this one arts award, but we need a second arts award. Or even in the case of and in fact, interkingdom anthropology time, Ontir does not have an award for fighting. Every other kingdom does, but we didn't, because the perception of, why do we need that? The idea is that how do we recognize individuals? So you can argue by saying, do we have too many awards or not enough awards? I would say we're probably at a good balance, because people are trying to say, we're recognizing you for what you're doing, and this is what we give you, but we're not going, hopefully, unlike 20 years ago where people actually were thinking about, are we doing the merit badge approach? And there was some actual serious discussion among all the kingdoms on, are we looking at this as merit badges, peerage points, to quote an old Gerhard von Noflamen play. And a lot of the kingdoms are going like, yeah, we need to throttle back, or no, this is our identity as a kingdom. So it's almost like it depends. Ontir has always been the joy is in the service. And where if you get an award, it's just like, what, you mean you don't have it already? But at least we want to recognize you for it. But we haven't got to the point where we're splitting hairs on, here's your low-level service, here's your mid-level service, here's your high-level service, and here's a pelican and or laurel.
Ludwika?
So regarding that whole stepping stone kind of attitude, it certainly does exist. There are people who think that, oh, I got a jam, so I probably am going to be a laurel pretty soon, or I got a goot, that means I'm going to be a pelican pretty soon. So what I try to encourage people to do, rather than say, I got my jam, I suggest that they should say instead, I received a jam, because that way that puts you in a community of other people who have received that recognition. And it doesn't really belong to you. It belongs to the crown, and the crown has recognized you with it. Like I do the same thing with people who have been elevated to peerage. I received my pelican. Well, it's really not your pelican. It is the crown's. You are the crown's. So it is a pelican or the pelican. I've often heard people say, I want my court barony. Well, it's not yours. So that just to try to discourage people from thinking that that there's a stepping stone in awards, that if they recognize that those awards are all spring from the crown and still belong to the crown, then the concept of it being a box to check off is a little less evident, I think.
I like it. Alfred?
I think what in a way what you're saying, Ludwika, is we shouldn't look at it as a thing. In other words, is it the medallion you wear? If I don't wear my my regalia for being a pelican, does that make me not a pelican? Or in other words, is it the stuff, or is it something else? And really what it comes down to is for the major peerages is it's that right and responsibility of participating as an advisor to the thrones, right? Now, what we call the non-advisory peerages, the order, the lesser peerages, if you will, the goots and the jams and even the baronial level recognitions don't have that same onus, although at a baronial level you are advisors to the baron and baroness typically, at least in Three Mountains. I can't talk across all the baronies, but that's what it's really should be more about is you know, this is sort of our acknowledgement that you are now someone that I would feel comfortable sending other people for advice on that area that you are good at, you know, kind of a deal. Anyway, I've not said well, but I think you know what I mean.
I think I bring some modern presuppositions about this. I'm a college teacher, for those of you who don't know. So there's this disconnect between students thinking that like getting an A is just its own thing. It's this magic box that you open up. Whereas instructors sort of think that it's you acquire a set of skills and that's a recognition of a place that you're at. And so I think you guys have dealt with this super duper well. But of course, as a knight, my main experience with this is people who say like, what do I need to do to get knighted? And the answer is, well, you go make yourself a knight, right? You go find out what you admire in other knights and be better than that is what you do to get knighted. And so I sort of wanted to think about this notion of awards as a hoop you jump through to get a dangle versus like a recognition of a state that you've achieved. And I know Ulf has given me, I don't know if you want to jump in and say this better than I can. He said like there are people who are goal oriented, and I respect that, and that's 100% not me. But I think it's one thing to say like that's a state I've got to achieve, and another thing to say that's a thing I've got to get. And I really like that, Ludwig. I love your way of saying it is a goot that I got that is the crown's goot. That's a really nice way to sort of frame that as entering a collective experience rather than sort of a checkbox you've ticked off. I love it.
So there was a time when it was sort of anathema to indicate that you would like to get the recognition. That was likely to set you back innumerable amount of times when you speak that way, you know, and in some ways, I never fully agreed that we were taking the right aspect there. To say that you shouldn't aspire to attain something, you know, that seems backwards also. But I think what it was also was we think you should be doing this because you love to do it, not because somebody's going to give you something for doing it. And that if you're doing something not because you love it, but because you think it's the thing that you have to do to get something, then you're not on the right path. You know, so
that's my purest attitude, but I think Ulf has educated me to the point that things can be two things, that those things are both possible, right? You can love a thing and say that is the thing that I'm hoping, that's where I'm aiming, right? I think that's...
Yeah, I just think there's a lot of people that's how they drive themselves for that. It's not necessarily the only thing they want is that award or whatever. It's just that's how people focus their energy towards that.
I have nothing against being goal oriented, but I think that you end up with more bitter people that are doing something that they're not really enjoying because they have oriented on a goal, and then when it doesn't come fast enough, you know, they're feeling a little betrayed because I worked really hard at this thing I don't really enjoy and nobody's giving me kudos, you know. Anyway.
I think even Ludwig, I'm sorry, I just want to jump in. I'll go right to you in a second. I think you're both saying the same thing, because if you're looking at the goal as a hateful ordeal you've got to get through to get that trinket, then that's not the right path. If you're a person who loves what you're doing and the way you motivate yourself to go to practice when you'd rather sit on the sofa and eat Doritos is saying, if I don't do that, I'm not going to get my belt, then that's totally valid, right? But I think it's just things can be two things. Yeah, Ludwig.
I think there was a time, and I'm sure that there are people who still feel that way, that if someone says, "Oh, I want to be a pelican," or "I want to be a knight," or et cetera, that's a marker saying, okay, that person's never gonna be elevated. I think I don't agree with that. I may have at one point in my life, but I don't any longer. I have evolved. So I try to tell my apprentices and people that hang out with me that it's okay for you to aspire to be recognized for the gifts that you give, for the things that you do. As long as you continue to love to do that, then do it all the hell you want, and you will be recognized for it, even if you're kind of only half-assed good at it, frankly, because that there's nothing wrong with that. There's plenty of things to do, plenty of places of need in the SCA, and geez, not even just in the SCA. So there's nothing wrong with wanting to achieve that, and I no longer hold that against anyone who says, I want to be a knight or I want to be a pelican. Well, okay, here's what it's going to take.
Preach. For me, it's mostly if they're doing things solely for the purpose of getting the award, I look askance at that, right? If it's, oh, I need to change my fighting style to become a knight, I'll do that until I become a knight. I find that, but anyways, cool. That was really good. Shall we move on to the virtual SCA? All right. Barrick, take it away. The internet obviously has changed everything. I don't know if this is true for you. I have a hard time remembering a lot of my friends' SCA names because I see their mundane names every day on their Facebook feeds. And it's been great in that it's magically brought us together. And I think, Barrick, you're going to talk a little bit about the open marketplace, which is phenomenal. And it's been horrible because the internet is the worst possible place to communicate with other human beings, except these days for all the alternatives. And so there's, again, like all the things we've been talking about, it's a real mixed bag. So Barrick, take it away.
This is going to be one of those, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Okay, prior to AS20, AS25, the only way we got our information was Shire newsletters, baronial newsletter, kingdom newsletters. If you didn't have access to a newsletter, you didn't know what was going on. When you would go to an SCA event and there was crash space, what was the first thing you would do? Show me your library. You know, the idea is that it was almost like from the Dark Ages, is that there was so little information being transferred, no one knew what was going on. It's like, but I'm talking to someone, not in an SCA event because none of our resources were there, but it was either at their home. And so early on, there was that, you know, any little bit of information was good information. The most important person, in my opinion, out of every branch was that branch chronicler. When you became a crown or a print or a coronet, what was the first thing would happen? Your mailbox would be stuffed with news. The idea is like, and those newsletters would be indication of how productive or how productive that branch was. It could be as simple as, oh, here's our minutes, here's our officers, or they would be like, oh, I don't know, the Leaf, or out of a Lionsgate, just the idea of like all these newsletters, but that was information or transfers. And this is where I get to do audiovisual, around AS20, AS25, these things happened. And then suddenly you had branches of, hey, our branch has a BBS. We're going to start communicating. Dial into this number and we can all still hear that scream. Exactly. And for the old timers, this would have been like, that is music to my ears. And then suddenly a little bit of the world opened up. You had light. Before it would be like, oh my God, you're at a college, you're in a town with a university. Oh my God, I want to go to your university library and get books on stuff. And then as soon as people with BBS stuff is like, oh my God, someone's documenting how they did things. I want to capture that. And then Usenet came. Who here does not remember Rec.org SCA? The Rialto.
I remember it.
Exactly. The idea is that I am talking to someone on the other side of the known world, and they're sharing information. And then suddenly search engines, Alta Vista. I found out how to make armor from someone in Mid-Realm, and they somehow got copies of their, gauntlets. I'm going to copy those. And so this growth of knowledge. And so from AS20, when email started coming out, it's like, oh my God, email, we're talking to each other, and group notes. And then suddenly around AS25, AS30, branchers are going like, well, no one really likes our newsletters. We're going to do a web page. And then suddenly all these branches were, the branch chroniclers had learned HTML, and they had learned how to put together web pages. And even on tier says, oh my God, we got to get a web page going because people want to know what's going on. And then suddenly 20 years ago, social media. Who had MySpace? Show of hands for MySpace. Oh, come on. But the idea is that it's almost like that part of in historical and from a history is the first printing press. Before, knowledge moved slowly. You had personal libraries. Yes, you had newsletters, but no one really knew, how do I make armor? How do I make costuming? Unless someone published, or you go to a 12. And again, this is where Crown events were really big. Someone could say, hey, I have this access to patterns. I have this access to information. But then something happened. Something wonderful happened. The internet opened up the SCA to where it's almost like all this information is now being shared. Even now with the MySpace and Facebook, we now have so much information, and any person now saying, I have all this information, how to make patterns, how to make armor. As Ulf says, I can find 7 people who makes armor across all the costs. It's like, I want cheap, or I want to drop a couple thousand to make the best armor ever, and they can do it. It's a blessing. Now, again, a bit of a curse. You no longer have this focus of, are branches now important in sharing that information? No, you go onto the internet. Do branches do newsletters? No, we have a Facebook page. You get onto that. So from a virtual anachronism, it's, again, best of both worlds, the best of times. And the reason we've done so well over the last 20, 25 years is that all this information is available now, from web pages, from downloadable PDFs, from YouTube videos of, this is how you shape metal. This is how you cut leather. This is how you make patterns. To, of course, the downside. Everyone has an opinion. Some opinions you really don't want to hear about. But the idea is that the globalization is both good and bad, but yet it has made the SCA stronger, is that we now know so much more on costuming, armoring, which now with people coming in, that bar is so high. Is that, well, what do you mean you haven't gone online and done your research for, 12th century German or 15th century, English? Is that it's all on the internet? Can't you find it? And so compare that to 30, 40 years ago, where if you wanted to make a Norse dress, you just hung the towel, with the little things on the side. And it's like, oh my God, that's perfect work. So, this is how the internet allowed a renaissance of SCA growth. Okay, this is where we take a drink. When I was on the board of directors, we discovered email and the idea of some central location where people could share information. This was brand new. And people were like, oh my God, we learned so much. It's not like, oh, you had a Xerox copy of someone's stuff. Now it's like, oh, I can pull it right off the internet and do it. Or in the way of merchants, I had barely been able to sell my armor within my area. Now I've got international sales. I can't keep up. So the ESCA has been fantastic, but at a cost. And that cost is that we become so globalized, we become, it's like, why can't you find all this good information? You're not keeping up. And if you can't keep up, And this is where that disparity of, economics comes in. If you can't afford it, why are you playing this game? From a virtual contact, and in fact, look what we're doing here. Even before pre-pandemic times, we were still able to communicate like this far away. Yes, we can travel all the way up to a 12th night, but during some 12th nights, people would have their phones out recording that coronation, recording that peerage, and posting it to Facebook, to YouTube almost immediately, because it's almost like a virtual attendance. And this is almost like how we brought more people into what we're doing. But yet it almost dilutes everything because you're not traveling. We're not getting that face-to-face. We can argue about, well, as having 12 nights at a hotel is bad. Well, yes and no. You lose the idea of crash space, but look at the opportunity of all these people coming together and talking in the hallways. Yeah, it's not quite an ESEA thing, but the idea of, from a virtual standpoint, we're developing and growing. And now that we're using Zoom, we're using other aspects, social media, a lot of branches are communicating a lot more, but there's no wall for behaviors. Sometimes when you're face-to-face, people know, okay, I really shouldn't say this. However, with the anonymity of the internet, people can be less than ladies or lords on how they respond to things. And this is where things fall apart. We have all probably participated in conversations within the SCA where someone, because of anonymity, just is being a jerk. So, basic for the idea of anachronism, it's been great. Our growth of knowledge has been fantastic. We have this almost infinite amount of information of how to get our costuming, our armor, our arts and sciences doing well, but we lose that personal contact. Comments, questions?
I was thinking, this is really interesting. No, I'll save mine to the end. You guys go. I should keep my mouth shut. You're the panel. I'm the moderator.
I found the other thing it's done for us is we've been in contact with other groups. I've been watching what some of the, I don't know what they are exactly. They're not, I don't know what you call them, but some of these groups in Poland, they're not doing the Battle of Nations stuff. They're doing something different. And I've been very impressed with what they're doing. And I would really like to go to some of their events. They look like they're having a lot of fun. And, they're upping the game. We can get, we can have better encampments from what's coming out of them, because they've really gone into being authentic. And you can get, if you want to have a full blacksmith, cooking outfit, you can get it from, out of Poland for a fraction of the price and right away, and really good looking authentic stuff. Same thing with weapons and everything else. I mean, it's nice that we can, get involved with these other groups that, I don't know if they existed before or not, but they're, at first I heard it was the Battle of Nations stuff, and they had way more than that, and I was completely unaware of. But the other problem I have is, we see a lot of people sniping at each other, and people getting mad at each other, and a lot of times it's not because they're trying to be. What's got them going is someone misunderstood the way it was written. They didn't understand, because you're not talking face to face, you're not getting the inflections of their voice, so you don't know if they were making a joke or they were being serious, and then then they start getting after each other, and then this whole flame wars start up. I had a squire, not too long ago, basically had to quit the SCA because of what happened with all that, and what was the way people interpreted what he said was not the way it was intended, even closely, and it just goes, that's where we have to really be careful with the internet, is that people start attacking each other without understanding what they're meaning. I got to the point I was almost being censored from at home to make comments, because whenever I did, I got myself in trouble, even though I was not, intending to do that. So I was getting to the point I was scared to speak on any of the forums. Or I have to get someone else to reread what I was saying.
Yeah.
I think this is one of the most profound changes that has happened in the 50 years of the SCA. In the early days, you know, we functioned by letters and phone calls and face-to-face meetings almost entirely. And then the change that Barrick describes took place, and the pace of information accelerated so much. And this is something, for speaking as an older folk person, there's a lot of running to catch up and keep up. And there's also a lot of research that I originally did by sitting in the stacks of the library at the University of Washington that now I can just do by learning how to do searches of the Abu Dhabi National Museum or something like that. I can't even think of the sites that I can now go and find images that I need that I couldn't find before, that I'd never seen in my life. But this is really the hugest change. And it's not something that we purposely did, of course. It's where the world went, and we got carried along with it.
One of the neatest things, and this we're talking, I'm probably thinking 30 years ago, I went to a Penzic, and people were just so elated that they were able to run phone lines to the merchants. And the merchant was saying, we take both MasterCard and Lady Visa. And the idea that people were saying, oh my God, I can now buy stuff immediately. But then on the other side, the idea like, oh my God, all these merchants have websites where I can tell my friends back home, you've got to order this stuff. So you're right. It was just almost like, you know, a whole new world opened up as soon as the internet opened up for the SCA, and our knowledge just grew exponentially.
The world opened, as did our wallets.
Yeah. And the idea, but in a way, you can say, like, is it good or bad? It's neither. It's both. The idea is that it allowed us to develop so much that, in a way, in a way, you know, we discovered, like, oh my God, there's other groups that are kind of like us. We never would have known about them if it wasn't for the internet. You know, and so where Einar is saying, like, oh my God, there's Eastern European groups that are doing costuming research. We want to learn that costuming stuff too. And so all these groups are hopefully exchanging information. Yes, it's like drinking from a fire hose, but hopefully we're all able to say, can I at least throttle that information where I'm not overwhelmed by it?
And it's, as it's pointed out in the chat, it's an inclusion and diversity issue as well.
Oh, yes. Yes, and therein lies another issue of, depending where you are socioeconomically, do you have access to the internet? Do you have full access to the internet to do all this stuff?
That's true.
Rowena, I'm going to aim this at you, but anyone can jump in. I was just thinking about one of the things I find interesting about this is it feels like there's been a shift away from sort of person-to-person transmission of information to sort of global transmission of information. So Barrick was talking, or was it Ulford, was talking about, you show up at someone's house for Crashbase and the first thing you do is check out their library. And I remember when I was starting out, not only sort of all those like the baronial newsletters and so on, but also things like Newcomers Ithras. There was so much face-to-face transmission of information that, like, everything you learned about the SCA, you learned from standing in front of someone and them telling you that stuff. And now that's not the case. Now, if you want to know how to fight, you don't go to fighting practice and go to fighting practice. You go online and you look at Duke Sean's videos. If you want to know how to, you know, make a gusseted arm, you go online and you find out what Rosalie's Medieval Ladies in Australia thinks. And so there's, like, it's the, I'm curious about the dynamic of that, especially as you're a Magister Ithra. I'm curious about that, but anyone else can jump in as well.
Well, one of the thoughts that comes to me is a person can't really learn a skill in the same way online as they do in person. You know, I've been a dancer for 40 years also, and I have tried taking online classes during this year that we're locked in our manors, and it is not the same. It is not the same as being able to ask the teacher specifically, how are you doing that movement?
Mm-hmm.
And I would imagine that a fighter has that same challenge. And the face-to-face transmission of cultural information is another thing that's really important. I really think that one of the things that made Ontario the way it is, the kind and generous kingdom that it is that some of us grew up in the presence of Gerhard and Amanda, two of the kindest, best examples of how a person should be, that, you know, walked and talked in our kingdom and taught us so much about how to interact with each other. Now we are interacting with at a remove so much, and what's happening. And as a web minister, one of the things that we're cognizant of is that there are people who don't use Facebook, and we cannot exclusively transfer our information on Facebook. We have to respect those people and get to them in the ways that works for them.
Yeah, I think it's a mixed bag that Barrick was talking about, because on the one hand, it's awfully exciting to be able to learn stuff from all over the world. On the other hand, it's interesting the stuff you lose when you're not actually talking to another human, you know? Yeah, Ludwika. Oh, and Ulf.
Ulf could go first. See it.
I was just going to comment that another thing, and I think this is very applicable in the modern world as well, but all of this has created an incredible sense of urgency and immediacy about everything. And so, I mean, Rowena can also relate to this, but like, as someone who's been involved with the Ontario web infrastructure for a long time now, like, something happens, like, we know about it right away. Like, there's no, oh, I guess we'll deal with it later. I mean, I remember when I started in the early 90s, it was much like you were talking about. Okay, well, I get my newsletter every month, and maybe I bump into somebody and talk to them, but that was kind of just as, you know, there wasn't really a web presence quite yet. And so it's just created this serious urgency, like everything's expected quicker, you know, not just in terms of us, you know, doing the web stuff, but everything is expected to be done quicker, handed over quicker, processed quicker. For officers, all the offices, you know, it's expected that they respond like that, and it can be a bit much at times, to be honest.
What I was going to say was that concerning that, what Rowena was talking about, the whole trying to teach people online. She has firsthand experience as she participated in a challenge I posted for the Stromgard Founding Rebel, which was for a master to teach an apprentice something over the interwebs. And we had 3 entries, and they were all very different. It was a really nice competition, but she had very unique challenges teaching someone to do a particular style of dance, separated by hundreds and hundreds of miles. Whereas, so we had her team, and we had a team that was actually local, but they also did their training over the interwebs. And it brings up different challenges. I mean, there's always going to be problems with teaching people in person. I can still recall very vividly from when dirt was still shiny, trying to teach a young woman how to put chainmail together, and she simply had no ability to use 2 pair of pliers at the same time. It was painful. And there was nothing at the time, there was nothing I could do to actually teach her how to use a pair of pliers, let alone 2 pair of pliers. So I did my best, and she did her best, and she persevered, but she never took it up because she could not use pliers. It was crazy. So there's always going to be issues with teaching. And teaching online has its own set of issues, the least of which is connectivity, really.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Ulf had a great question that I want to throw out here. This is, I realize that this sort of binary question is a bit silly, but do you feel that the internet has made the SCA more tribal or less tribal?
It's made us more aware of inter-kingdom anthropology, and it's almost like we discovered, a great library, and we can just run through all the stacks. We've got all this knowledge, but how do we deal with it? So I'm not sure about tribal. It's just more of, there's just so much information here. What do we do with it?
So I was just going to say, I don't know that it made it more or less of that at all. It just, like a lot of other things going on these days, it maybe changed the alignments of the tribes.
I think
So, and, depending on your position, you might say, well, it's more tribal now. And a different position might be, oh, no, it destroyed my tribe, It's like,
Just for clarity, did you say tribal or trouble?
I said tribal, but I'll take trouble if that's the way you want to answer it.
So I think sometimes it's made it more trouble. Even just putting together a small event, there's a lot to be done you'd think that a meeting like this, for those of us who don't know, it seems very simple. You just, plug it in and the algorithm does all the work. It's fantastic, but that's not true. There's all sorts of things that are involved. Three Mountains had its first ethereal event a few months ago, and the event steward for that really banged out a lot of the wrinkles for the future. So I think the concept of virtual events is a good one, and one that we should hold on to, because this kind of thing could not happen around a fire.
Yeah,
it would be awesome and it would be a lot of fun, but no, we wouldn't be able to hear each other, we wouldn't be able to see each other, there would be excessive drinking and singing, and which I really am looking forward to.
But also downsides.
Singing just doesn't work on Zoom. Yeah,
it really doesn't. I do not have good microphone quality, or what is that thing that they fix, the auto tune? I don't have auto tune. I need auto tune now. So I think it does have a lot to offer.
Hold on, Rowena.
I notice a lot of people in the chat are observing all the wonderful things that they've learned using connectivity to pick up a skill, which I have done too. I've met some really cool people who have taught me classes, and they've lived in Trimaris and the East and places like that. I never would have met them. So that's a cool side of what's happening now.
Yeah. Oak?
But I think we've made us a lot less tribal, because back in the day, you had to rely on your tribe. If you wanted a costume, I'm not a costumer. I can't sew with means, but I've got a good person that's part of my group, and I'm nice to them. They can sew me something really nice. Or if I belong to this group, I've got an armor in there who can help me get my armor. Nowadays, you don't need the tribe. I needed someone, a knight to teach me. Well, now you don't need a knight to teach you. You can do it online. You can order your stuff online. You can get your costume online. You can get your armor online. You don't need your tribe. But back then, being part of one group or another group was, it really helped, because you had people that could help you and get you through to get your stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Alfred, I find it really interesting the way you say it, realign the tribes. I remember sort of at the peak of my participation, I thought of myself less of a Lionsgate person and more of a like Varangian / noisy section of Vontier kind of citizen. So like tribalism has always been a little bit geographically weird, but I feel like it's broken geography as the definer of your tribe, right? Now you pick your tribe from all over the world to a larger extent. Cool.
Yeah, totally lost it.
If it comes up, just jump on in later on. It's all good.
I was going to mention that the court that Ludviga alluded to, the Three Mountains virtual event. The nice thing about court was I saw every scroll up close. I got to see the front of the person when they were, asked to stand up virtually and get their recognition. I could hear everything. So anyway, it worked. That's all I'm saying.
Cool. Was someone else trying to jump in there? No?
No.
Cool. Okay, well, let's move to our last topic. Does the SCA know its history? This is a big bugbear for me. I've always thought it was cuckoo pants that we're ostensibly a history society, and like very few people know any of the history of the SCA before they showed up, with the possible exception that people know that Diana Listmaker is a human who existed at some point and did something that people talked about. And I find the SCA history super neat. I am in the middle of a bit of a Dunning-Kruger, realizing I don't know nearly as much as I thought I did, pit of despair. But I think it's something that I don't understand why we don't all just have a bunch of like SCA songs about the cool things that have happened and SCA histories written and so on. So I want to know what you guys think about that. Ludwig, I'm going to start with Oak if that's okay, because it's Oak's pet topic, and then you guys can jump in afterwards. Oak, take it away.
I think a lot of that really varies on who you are and where you are, kind of thing. Some people are really good at teaching the history of people and passing on the knowledge, and others it's slid away and forgotten. One of the best examples I have is we're not. I think a lot of cases we're not doing that. Up here we had Duke Paul move north, and he was the mover and shaker and one of the developers of the way we fight today. I remember, we'd go down to Seattle in a heartbeat, to hope to get a fight practice because we heard he was coming up. Any chance to learn from him, we jumped at. And then I saw, a few years back, we had fight practices up here, and we had some newcomers coming up, and Duke Paul was trying to teach them, and they went, well, who's this guy? And yeah, I want to learn from this guy over here, who's the hot knight right now, or the new Duke, and and they don't know who taught him. This is the guy that taught him was taught by the guy who taught him and before him as well. So we, I think we, as the higher peers or whatever, should be trying to encourage and teaching, the fact, yeah, that guy that that taught you how to do that, he learned it from this guy, who learned it from this guy, who learned it from this guy, or that helmet, the original guy that developed the pattern was here. So I think it's up to us to teach them, our history. That I think we've been lax at that in some cases. I mean, there's lots of exceptions where they actually are doing a good job, but we don't have the newcomer workshops anywhere. We don't have the people, pressing our, like as you said, when we first started, you wouldn't talk about the hockey game when you're at the event, because that was a no-no. But no one's been taught that anymore.
Yeah.
I forgot about it myself. And so we need to try to encourage what we learned, and as they said too, what we learned from Gerhard and Amanda, and they were the ones that taught us a lot of this stuff. I remember at court, Gerhard would make a real point of taking the coronet off his head when he did his own personal business, rather than when he was doing baronial business.
Mm-hmm.
And we see a lot of the royals today have not learned, they've forgotten that, or they didn't learn it from, and they went around after Gerhard and Amanda, and we forgot to teach them the fact that, this is what I do when I'm on the thrones, and this is what I do when I'm off the thrones. And we don't do that enough, I think.
Mm. Eric?
Let Ludwig go first because she had her hand up first.
Ludwig.
Well, you've made me have an idea. As Stormmaker, I'm sponsoring a series of challenges over the next year, and they're all going to be, they might end up being an event, I don't know. One of them I want to do, because I haven't heard any new lately, is a filk song. So I think I'm going to change the parameters of that filk song challenge that is in honor of Robert McFlandry to a based on an Ontarian or SCA historic thing.
Cool.
So there, that I just got excited.
Me too.
And yet what we really need is for the old timers to write down the stories. There's not always going to be a song, and the song sometimes has to be explained, and we need people to write down these stories. You just mentioned Robert McFlandry. How many people who are listening to this call know who Robert is? How many people know what the Dun Cow is? What the Dun Cow was? The Dun Cow was an incredible part of our culture from about 1980 to 1984, 1985. It was the center of every event when the crown was not occupying the royal pavilion and the fighting wasn't going on. Everyone went to the Dun Cow, and there was this big party going on, and people were dancing and singing, etc. No one knows that story. The Varangian Guard, no one knows the origin story. No one knows who was in it. Making of the kingdom, no one remembers who was on the kingdom committee, how we became a kingdom. This stuff needs to be written down, please.
There was a guy that once put together this big epic poem about each of the reigns of the kings of Antir. And that was really a great vehicle for sort of carrying forward, you know, a history lesson. But we don't hear that much anymore. But anyway.
Too bad that guy isn't around much anymore.
Yeah. Whatever happened to him anyway.
We used to carpool more together, you know, so that's when you'd hear a lot of these stories.
Yeah.
You know, and now, you know, we don't carpool anymore, and we don't travel as much as we used to as well, I don't think. So we don't get those long 12-hour drives where you got to tell stories and tell each other, you know,
Well,
how'd you start, you know? And
yeah, as somebody said, we sit around and we talk about what movie we saw that last week. We don't talk about what happened when Torgal, you know, waved the crown outside of his tent. Can I go Barrick first and then Ulfred and then Ludviga? Because Barrick wanted to jump in quite a while ago.
No, I'll wait for Ludviga and Ulfred to jump in first.
Ulfred, then Ludviga. Oh, or Ludviga first.
Okay. I just wanted to say I get a lot of mileage out of the preface you wrote for the Antir handbook. And I share the Antir handbook with as many people as I possibly can. In fact, I need to put it on the group Facebook pages and websites again, just so that people can go and read it, because it does have a lot of great information in it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have to thank you for that preface, though I cannot get through it without sobbing. But it is beautiful prose. Thank you.
Thank you.
I was just going to observe that one thing I've realized, maybe more recently, because of our current last year situation, that and the sisters interviews and all that are and other activities similar, that we all know our history narrowly in many ways. Like, even if we just talk, we've been mostly talking about Antir history. You know the history of the culture you're in right now, right? But several years ago, and this is where I first started to get glimmerings of this, my lady wife discovered the History of the West website, where they talk about, and it was in a sort of a wiki-like thing, and so people would jump in and they'd have these discussions recorded, you know, about what each person recalled, and they all recalled it a little differently, and all. But there's stuff in there about my early days in Antir, and it's like, wow, that's an interesting that's how they saw it, and that I didn't see it at all. You know, and I was engaged in those things that they were writing about, and so I was getting a perspective on in our own history up here in Antir from the perspective of those just outside of it, observing it and recording it. And his name totally escaped me, but a fellow that we met at a Sport of Kings, I believe, who was relating Antirian history to me. And he knew more about Antirian history, he was from Aytonville, than I will ever know. and he knew people and dates and who knighted who and who followed who and all of that. And so you're right, we don't get that much, but it took some particular people that were interested in pursuing it too. That them, it was so exciting. That history was exciting for its own purposes, and then they're excited to meet the people that they had been reading about. But I felt like a dolt hearing this stuff and going, Well, you know that better than I do. I don't really recall who was just before me on the, you know, but anyway, so it's that I know nothing about East Coast history, SCA history. No, I hardly know Aytonville. I've been learning a lot from Duke Morgan, being that he's local to my area now and stuff, and well, and Deaton Clayburgh, his dad, who's here also. So anyway, that's I don't know, amazing, interesting, wonderful, worthy of knowing. So,
I just want to say, you mentioned two things, and for anyone who's watching this, if you're not aware of this, if you haven't seen the website, the History of the West site, you should go look at it. It is a work of wonder. And the other thing is, a couple of times people have mentioned the Two Sisters interviews. I assume that everyone here knows what those are, but if you don't, you should go check them out. They are a great mitzvah, I think, to the society. Barrick.
I'm about to say, for those who are making history, don't realize they're making history until years after the fact.
Yeah.
I mean, what could be a simple, wow, we just had our first princess in her own rights. No big thing. Go forward 20 years. Oh my God, did you realize how important that was? No, it was a thing. So for a lot of these stories that develop into, hey, something happened last week, to folklore. Hey, do you remember what happened 3 years ago, to stuff of legend? Do you remember stuff that happened 20, 30 years ago? It's more of, someone just said the SCA is like a small town where you can have 2, 3, even 4 generations of people all sitting around, partying together, drinking together. All these things are happening, but yet, for later generations, like, oh my God, that happened to you? Yeah, but we didn't think it was a big thing at the time. Yes, we should remember it, but, like any organization, be it the Lions, the Elks, yeah, we've got these stories of what's going on in our organization. And yes, we are unique. We're dedicated to the study of the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, at least the parts that interest us the most. But, and yeah, we can share this information, but it's more like, hey, remember that one party where we did this? Or, hey, remember that time at band camp when that's what a lot of these stories are. But they make great fireside chats 20, 30, or even 40 years down the line. We should embrace them, but, they're just stuff that happened. It wasn't like, oh, yes, we knew we were changing the future. It's more like, yeah, we just happened to be in the right place, the right time, and this happened. Or someone made this decision and it was the right decision. And look what happened to the future early on in the conversation. King Torgal says, I want to stand in the middle of the Eric and I want to look all the way around and I don't want to see blue tarp. And what did the kingdom do? We took that as a challenge and we said, all right, we're going to get rid of our blue tarps and we're going to put canvas in its place. And to this day, Ontier has a sort of unwritten rule that from either the, from the thrones are, or in the middle of every Eric, you can look all the way around. It's just like, I don't see a modern tent. I don't see blue tarp. I see period encampments. And at the time where someone makes this comment, it's just like, yeah, I just thought this needed to be done. No big thing. But ideas are like acorns that grow into great oaks. And all we need to do is just recognize that those great ideas grew into great oaks, and we need to recognize them, talk about them. But I don't think we should obsess over them. I mean, we're people and we want to do great things.
I obsess over them because we're in a historical society. I want history. I'm going to go Rowena and then Alfred.
So, Sir Antonio, you had asked earlier about the question of how is our tribe doing? Duchess Miranda put a really great comment that's over in the chat here, where she says the culture and origin stories are what bind us.
Yeah.
The stories that we need, because this is what made Ontario and what still makes Ontario.
Mhm.
And if we're concerned with the perpetuation of the way Ontario is, which people who come here from other kingdoms and they go, holy cow, we like the way this kingdom runs. Let's keep that, and let's keep our stories that helped us make it that way. Why do we have 2 reigns a year instead of 3? Anyone know that story? Why do we? What happened to the Dun Cow? Where's that story? You know, things like that.
The Ontario Rebellion, for heaven's sake. Like, how many people even know that story? The SCA was almost a completely different animal, right? That's huge, and people don't know.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sort of an aside topic, and I guess it's related to groups and the folklore that grows from those groups. 40 years ago, I had an opportunity to listen to Ray Bradbury give a talk. And this is out of Silicon Valley. And again, 1980 Silicon Valley, where technology was just booming. And someone out of the audience goes like, where do you see the future going? And he stopped and pointed back to the audience like, why are you asking me? You people are the ones who are making the future. You tell me what to write about. And for me, that was a big insight, is that it wasn't the writers at the time who were identifying what the future is going to be. We're making the future. And that we should be the one to create that folklore, to create those, 2, 3, 4 SCA generations from now of what are the stories people are going to talk about. So, we need to build, you're right. Culture binds us together. SCA culture binds us even more. So what we need to do is contribute in the way of, again, talking the 3 branches of the peerages. What are we doing contributing to the fighting, to the arts and sciences, to the service, so that, 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, even 30 years from now, people can talk back by saying, do you remember the story of this that happened so long ago from this, from these people? We're making the future. We need to do that.
So, binding back to something that you talked about earlier, Antonio, and it's maybe if we told some of the silly stories or the stories of the silly things that were done in the past, people might ponder different ways of that fit the current times of being silly in the future, if you will.
Yeah.
So.
I agree. Well, I mean, that's anytime anyone lets me talk in public, I try and rant about onto history stuff. So I hear you. I hear you. Hence me being excited about this panel. Cool. So I think that's really my topics. We've covered anything. Ulf, was there anything you wanted to throw in there?
No, that's great. Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, you guys have been phenomenal. This was a really enjoyable talk. I'm so pleased that you all agreed to do it, and it was I learned a lot. It was very exciting.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. It's so nice to see you all, my colleagues.
I can tell a story about the Biffy that burned down.
The Biffy that burned down?
Or burning snow. Anyone remember the story of burning
snow?
Flaming snow. We called it flaming snow.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, the burning. For those of us who are listening, there was a Crown event. I think it was in Wastekeep.
Derek, no, we're going to wind up. We can't do another story. Oh my goodness.
But this is okay. Stories grow.
I'll tell you what. Maybe I'm not sure how long this Lions Den thing is happening, but if I can convince them to let me do another one, maybe we can do another one where we just do nothing but sit around and tell all the embarrassing old stories.
Okay.
I think that would be awesome.
I have a lot of them.
Oh yeah, lots of them.
I have a lot of them.
Well, exactly.
There's embarrassing stories. And there's old embarrassing stories.
Oh, and someone in the chat said we never heard why Oak was knighted twice.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Oak's got to share that.
Well, my squire was getting knighted, and at that point he decided to take on my last name. That was starting of the, people, there was kind of new still, but there were a lot of times that the squires were taking on the knight last name. So Wolf became from Wolf McBean, or from Keith McBean. He owed his fealty to me and threw me to the king, is what he wanted for his ceremony. So he did that, and then he went and won crown. So how can a knight owe fealty, a king owe fealty to me, if he's the king? So anyways, I've been thinking about this for a while, and when he was going up for his coronation, the champions come out and toss down the gauntlet. And in doing so, they wait for a challenger. Well, no one ever picked it up, and everybody always talked about it. But anyways, Sven was the champion, and he threw down the gauntlet, and without telling anybody ahead of time, not telling Wolf, not telling Sven, I picked up the gauntlet. And it's like, well, what's going on? And so anyways, I put Wolf over the barrel at the moment, and and we sorted it out, and I released him from his fealty to me so he could become king. But in doing so, I made demands that he had to recognize my other children as Prince and Princess Royal. So anyways, he's now king. And I always complained that back in my day, when I got knighted, we didn't do the buffet. So I never received my buffet. So Wolf thought, well, here's my chance. So I got told to report to court and had to come in and bring in my make sure I had all my regalia on, make sure I had my spurs, my boots, my spurs and my belt and my chain on, So I show up at court, trying to figure what's going on, and he calls me forward and asks for me to hand back my chain to him. But I can do that, and then my spurs, and then and I have no idea what's going on, and he's got this big grin on his face, and he's really enjoying this, and he's got me all squirming around. He says, well, complained that he never received his buffet. So, and at that time too, I hadn't received my AA scroll. So he was, here, give me a chance. So he presented me my AA scroll, as a lord. And then now he's going to make, go back and give me back my knighthood stuff. And I can get my, and in doing so, I'm going to get my buffet. So he called all the knights forward, and I was about to receive my my buffet from my plowboy of a squire, or Wolf was he had a pretty heavy hand, so I was going, oh boy, this is gonna be a good one, and I was kind of worried, but I got saved, and this is when Barrick should tell the story.
And at that time, I was totally unaware, and they said, like, well, wait a minute. Einar was knighted before this, so we should bring up the king who knighted him at the time. And so they brought me up, and so I was given the honor with the king's hand upon my right shoulder. Through the king, I was given the power to knight Einar again. So after he was given the dubbing, I was allowed to give him the buffet. And so Einar was allowed to be knighted twice by my hands through the power of the king.
And I was saved from getting the buffet from Wolf.
Right. And the people thought that this was the coolest thing ever.
Nice.
But it was all basically Wolf getting revenge.
Yeah.
For me pulling a fast one on him.
Right. And he read me like a book by saying, Barrick will play into this, because I was surprised by it. It's like, yeah, Barrick will play into this because he recognizes the idea that the power of the king extends through you. And so he recognized that I was the king who knighted you. And in fact, we're part of that particular tapestry, which is it Seeger tapestry that still has us in there?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And if anyone has a chance to see the Seeger tapestry, which is probably 60 years in length now, I mean, it's huge. But the idea that having a show
not quite, but close.
I'm not sure if I was listed a second time, but the idea is that with Wolf's hand on my shoulder, I was able to knight Einar a second time.
Great story.
Nice.
Oh yeah.
Okay, well, it's 9 o'clock, so I think probably we want to wrap this up a little bit. I promised the panelists they don't have to be here for an hour because I thought if I lied, I could keep them for longer. So thank you so much again. I really appreciate it. I don't know, do we normally stick around and do some socializing afterwards, or do we wrap this up? People who are in charge.
Socializing.
I actually, Ludviga's not done with her wine, so that's a problem. I have to step out for a while. If you guys want to socialize, you can. I'm going to pass sort of the control of the thing over to Jarre, who's actually technically in charge. And I'll be back in a few minutes, but I have to go check on some things here. So thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. And I will see you guys all in a little bit.
Yes,
Rowena?
thank you. I'm just going to jump in for a moment to explain. Thank you, Sir Antonio. Jarre will be handling all of the buttons in the background, but I believe his microphone is not working at the moment. So,
Yes.
There he is. Excellent.
Woo.
Yay!
I do need to go. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you so much for
Hello to
joining us,
Ed
everyone.
Press.
Lovely to see you again.
Bye-bye.
What I was just about to sort of
Thank you.
share for everyone was that we do a little bit of a social afterwards, so don't feel like you have to run away, but also thank you for joining us for the episode. The episode itself is now over.
Dun dun.
Dun dun dun.
Maybe Jarre, change it back from spotlight to regular curve.
And stop the recording.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
let me bring up that embarrassing story about click.
I have an embarrassing story about my introduction to oak.
Oh, no.
Doesn't everybody have an embarrassing story about their introduction to oak?
Not me.
I do.
I was about 17 or 18 when a friend of mine said, "You're hanging out in the SCA. There's this guy I know. I'd really like to introduce him. He's kind of influential and stuff." I was like, okay, sure. But we're going to hang out for a while mundanely and I can introduce you. Sure, no problem. But this guy might pat you on the back a lot. What? And he was explaining how oak has this mystical ability to touch a woman anywhere on her back and her bra will just magically undo itself. I'm like, yeah, right. This is a tall tale. This is bullshit. So my Eddie Bear introduced me to Oak and we hung out around Vancouver for about 3 hours and stuff. And yeah, this creepy old guy just kept touching me on the back all for 3 hours. And finally, after about 3 hours, my Eddie Bear had pity on him